Hey, everyone. Good evening. My name is Nathan Bavell. I want to welcome you to Pierce Transit's Bus Rapid Transit Stream live open house for the community. This evening, we're going to be sharing an update on the project. You'll be hearing from Pierce Transit staff, as well as City of Tacoma's public utilities and WashDOT. So just to go over a few of our Zoom tips over the course of the past year and a half, I'm sure everyone is well accustomed to having virtual meetings. By default, everyone is on mute except for our presenters. We will monitor the chat function. If you have questions, please use the Q&A function within Zoom. We will pause for questions and try to answer those as we transition between each topic. If we happen to miss a question, there will be time at the end of the presentation for general Q&A, and we will circle back to any of those questions that we may have missed. We do have live Spanish interpretation as well as closed captioning available for those who would like to utilize those functions. Please use the appropriate button on your Zoom menu to access these features. In conjunction with this evening's presentation, participants or attendees are able to enter to win one of 5 $20 Orca cards. To be entered, just text your name to 253-514-0404. I also posted that number in the chat as well. This evening, here is this evening's agenda. We're going to have a brief introduction to the Bus Rapid Transit program. Following the project overview, a timeline of the project, our funding for the project. We've invited our partners here to provide updates from their end of this project, share information on our community outreach so far, provide an update on property impacts. We will be introducing the stream system expansion study we're currently undertaking, and then have time for those Q&A questions. And so with that, we will transition over to Tina Lee.
Thank you. Again, my name is Tina Lee. I'm Pierce Transit's planning manager, and I'm going to do a very high-level review of our Bus Rapid Transit corridor. Some of this will be information that many of our audience may have seen before, but we always have new people join us, so I will give you some of that earlier background and context as well. And we know that Pierce County is growing rapidly, and that's one of the reasons for our project. We're expecting significant growth in the future out to 2040 and even 2050. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. We have some projections that as we were developing the project, we looked at both census data as well as American Community Survey data. And we find that along the corridor, along the Pacific Avenue corridor that we're really talking about, population is expected to increase significantly, more than 25%. Employment is going to be growing. And we know that that means a lot more people traveling along the corridor. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And so this is a real problem that requires a lasting solution. And we've learned through a lot of our work in public transportation that often high capacity transit projects can really help our communities make it easier to ride public transportation. Go ahead, Nathan. So this is really where Bus Rapid Transit, and we often call it BRT, can help out. The project, you'll learn in our budget update, is primarily funded through a number of different grants, including federal dollars, funds from Sound Transit, our regional transit provider, and funds from the Washington State Department of Transportation. The service is efficient, it's cost effective, and it really helps us bring federal dollars back to our community so they stay with us versus going to other places in the country. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And then what is bus rapid transit? This is new for a number of folks, and we talk about high capacity transit service. Bus rapid transit, or BRT, it's a new line of service for Pierce Transit. It will really improve that transit service and ride along Pacific Avenue, our Route 1, and operating from downtown Tacoma out to Spanaway to about 208th Street. And by 2040, we expect to have more than 2.2 million riders every year on our BRT corridor. Go ahead to the next one. And we know it's efficient. We're going to talk to you about the service and how it operates, but also even the vehicle types. And when you think of bus rapid transit, you think of a 60-foot articulated coach. One of those coaches at peak loads when we're transporting a lot of people to and from work can carry up to 120 passengers. So we're estimating we can take a lot of cars off the road with each trip that we operate with bus rapid transit. Go ahead and go to the next one. And again, it's efficient, and part of that is the funding. Most of this is funded, the capital portion, I should say, is funded by grants. So these are dollars that we've competed for and been awarded for the project so that we can use our local funds for other services and operations. Again, it's our Route 1, which is the busiest route in Pierce Transit's system. On average, it represents about 12% of our annual ridership. And then we know growth is coming to that corridor. And today, about 55,000 people live within a half a mile of the corridor. And that number is expected to grow. So these are more people that will have access to public transportation and ways to meet their life needs traveling on our bus service. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So BRT, it's a number of things. I think of it as light rail operated by a rubber tire bus. It's bus service that looks like light rail service. It's frequent. Trips are every 10 to 15 minutes in the peak. That type of service, it's service where a rider doesn't need a schedule. They just know that bus will be there in the next 10 to 15 minutes. It's accessible. We'll design this meeting all ADA requirements, but also the buses are larger and easier for someone in a wheelchair to board. The stops are set up so that they're providing easier connections, not only to amenities or destinations along the corridor, but to other routes that cross the BRT or the Route 1 corridor. And also easy to ride. There are stations instead of bus stops, and we're going to give you a preview of what those stations look like. The buses have multiple doors, so think of that articulated 60-foot bus with 3 doors, and when that bus pulls up to the station, you can board at any of those doors, so it's much faster. And again, reliable. There's real-time signage at each station, so a rider knows when their bus is going to be arriving. Is it 5 minutes away or is it 8 minutes away? And then lastly, the service, we say it's fast, and by that we don't mean it's speeding, but we have these incremental improvements that just make the trip faster for the rider. Our projections right now is that from one end to the next in the corridor, a rider can save almost 20 minutes using bus rapid transit compared to the time it takes to ride our Route 1 today. Go ahead and go to the next slide. And so it's a traffic solution, and BRT, it's more than just a solution, but it really helps our community, and it's an investment that we bring to Pierce County, and it helps spur other investments in the community, either development, access, and it also helps with things like sustainability, and it's the healthier environment that we're trying to help promote with the service. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. BRT also really does strengthen our community. I mentioned that it supports the economic future of Pierce County, and we talk to other transit agencies, and as we learn more and more about bus rapid transit, what we really see happening in other corridors, even as close as Snohomish County or in Vancouver, Washington with the Vine, you see development, you see housing, jobs, and easier access along the corridor. This project is in both City of Tacoma and Pierce County's long-range plans, and it helps us respond to what we know is a growing demand for improved service for our Route 1 corridor, and it's that foundation for future bus rapid transit corridors that you're going to hear about. We also know that there are what are called opportunity zones along the corridor, and these are areas where there's federal investment opportunity for development to help in disadvantaged areas. And so we have 6 of those along the corridor that we can really help incentivize with this service. And it really just helps mitigate congestion by moving people and providing more options, and an option for service that is much more competitive with a car, because we help reduce that trip time from one end of the trip to the next. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Safety is also something that's really important and we want to mention, and you're going to hear this in a few different locations in the presentation, but we have embedded just in the design improvements that help with safety along the corridor. There are things like adding and improving signalized crossings for pedestrians. We have 7 different signalized crosswalks that are added. We are including median stations and improving some of the existing median refuge islands along the corridor. We are going to have improvements along the corridor where we control left turns at approximately 14 different intersections, and that really makes it safer because this is a high crash corridor, and these types of investments will help with that. And then lastly, you're going to learn about 4 roundabouts that are proposed in this plan that is being developed right now. And roundabouts really do help with safety and improve traffic flow and just make that corridor operate much more efficiently. And then lastly, I'd mentioned we're going to hear about median lanes or restricted use lanes for transit. Our first responders can use those lanes. So in an emergency, if they need to bypass traffic or congestion, they're able to use those same lanes that transit uses. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So this is the route overview. If you know our Route 1, this is Pacific Avenue SR7. North is to the left on this map. The corridor is 14.4 miles long. As I mentioned, it's our highest utilized service in Pierce County. On a daily basis, there's about 3,500 boardings along the corridor. And what you see here is the route map for our BRT system. Route 1, some of the improvements today does not go to the Tacoma Dome station, and that's a change with our BRT service. So if you board anywhere along the corridor, we can connect you to regional services or other routes at Tacoma Dome station. The corridor also in downtown will go up to Market Street, and that is an improvement that we really work closely with the city. They asked us to make that change so that we could have 2 parallel high-capacity transit corridors in downtown Tacoma. On the southern end, about 208th, there's a super Walmart down in that area. That's one of our highest boarding locations on the route, and that is near the southern end of this service. But we're also building the Spanaway Transit Center. It's a separate project, but this service will operate there, and that'll be the southern link for our service. The white dots you see on this map are the station locations. Today, if you ride the Route 1, there are about 65 pairs of bus stops. Some of those are just a pole in the ground. These dots represent the stations. There's 30 pairs of stations planned. Each station will have very similar amenities, and we'll go into details on that, but it's including covered waiting areas, passenger information, ticket information. I also want to point out these green lines. These are the routes that travel east-west and provide connections. Route 4, for example, is a corridor that we are targeting for a future BRT in the long-range plan, and that would provide a connection where you could ride a Route 1 Pacific Avenue bus rapid transit corridor and transfer to services on the Route 4 going to either Parkland, Lakewood, and then also into downtown Puyallup. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. Very quickly, we talk about different lane treatments, and really the two I want to highlight here are the second one. It's a light green color on this graphic. The business access transit lane, BAT lane. What that means is when we have this treatment on the corridor, we have a right lane, operates like an HOV lane for buses, but a car can operate in that as well if they need to make a right turn into a business or a right turn to a side street. Stations are on the right in that configuration. We have the orange median lane treatment. It's where we have a median lane that's exclusive to a bus in the center of the roadway, and our stations are in the center as well. And then in the very middle, there's a bidirectional lane. It's a very small lane, about 1/10 of a mile over the 512 State Route 512 on a bridge. And that's an area where there's not a lot of right-of-way, but it's one of the most congested areas in the corridor. And this bidirectional lane would help our transit riders get through that congestion much quicker. Go ahead and go to the next slide. This gives you an overview of where those lane treatments are located. As you can see, the green in the area in Pierce County, right above where it says Parkland Transit Center, that's where we would have BAT lanes. You see the bidirectional lane right to the north of where you see the Route 4, that's the 512 bridge. Orange area is the treatment where we have median lanes from about 121st, where our Parkland Transit Center is, to 96th Street, and then again from just north of 56th to 38th Street. And it's a proposal, and our plans are not quite at 60%, so they're still in development, but we want to show you these and get input as we continue to improve the design. Go ahead and go to the next slide. Here, I just want to really call out, I mentioned safety improvements, and you see where some of the proposed median refuge islands are, where it's we're improving how someone can cross the corridor when they're walking across the corridor. Also, where those green treatments are, that is where those median lanes are, and first responders can utilize these lanes in the event of emergency. And then want to call out very quickly, we are proposing 4 roundabouts. Those are at 96th Street, 121st Street, 138th, and 146th Streets. So 3 of those are in Pierce County, 1 in City of Tacoma. And we'll talk more about roundabouts and their safety benefits, and also for transit, improved time for buses to maneuver through those intersections as well. But there's some real advantages of having these roundabouts on the corridor. Go ahead and go to the next slide. So I'm going to transition here, and Sean Robertson, who is our project manager for BRT, will take over.
Yeah, thanks, Tina. So my name's Sean Robertson. I'm our Senior Construction Project Manager for Pierce Transit, overseeing this project. Before I start into my presentation, I just wanted to quickly note that there was some questions in the chat. We are roughly halfway through our presentation, and we'll be getting to some of those questions and Q&A towards the end of the presentation here. So just wanted to acknowledge that we saw your comments, and we will be getting to those soon. So I'm going to take you through our current station design and also talk about the budget and schedule. So starting with stations, what you'll notice that's going to be different about these stations is first that we'll have Orca card readers outside of the bus so that you can scan your card prior to boarding. We'll have real-time bus trackers so you know exactly when the next bus is coming. We'll have protection for weather. We'll also have ticket vending machines. So instead of paying for cash with cash on the bus, you can pay prior so it doesn't slow down pickup and drop off of the bus. We will also be providing designated areas for parking bikes and e-scooters so those don't get in the way of the boarding and offloading of the bus. And then we'll also provide raised platforms, roughly 9.5 to 10 inches, so that we have near level boarding so you can step on easily to the bus. And the platforms will span the entire bus length. So with these 60-foot articulated buses, you can board in the back doors. That just allows people to board multiple locations, and it quickly allows people to board and offload from the bus. Next slide. So these are some examples of the station design. What we did was we looked at the ridership and right-sized the stations for the amount of ridership that we're projecting. So for areas that have a lot of ridership, we're going with a large or full-blown 24-foot long station. In the areas that have medium ridership, we are putting in the 18-foot station. And then in areas that don't have much ridership, we still wanted to provide some coverage from the elements. As we know, it rains quite a bit here in the Northwest. So we also have a smaller 13-foot option. Next slide. This just shows you a rendering of the station. So if you're driving down the street, this is roughly what it's going to look like. This is a daytime rendering. The next slide will also show the nighttime rendering. So it's important for us not only to make sure that these are safe, but visible. So this nighttime rendering is just meant to show you the lighting at night. And then an important feature of this is we have the plinth with the stream logo on the top. So that allows folks to see where these stations are from a block away. So even if you're not a normal rider, you should be able to see these and locate the stations. Next slide. So updated project maps, we have put onto our website, which you can see is ridestream.org, some updated project maps, which you can go at your leisure and check out. But I did want to note some key design changes that have changed since we last presented to the community last year. We have decided to go curbside stations between 57th and 84th. That was an area where there was a lot less right of way. It necks down from 100 feet to 80 feet. There's also a lot of businesses built right up to the property line. So it made it rather difficult to widen, to put in median bus lanes, especially around the 72nd area. So we went back to curbside there so that we could stretch our budget to put in better improvements down the rest of the corridor. Another major change that has happened since we last presented was we added one more roundabout at 96. So we currently have 4 roundabouts projected on this project. And then last but not least, we've continued to do station refinements, much of which I just shared with you earlier. Next slide. So this is just a couple examples of the plans that we have shared online, but this, for example, is South 50th Street. So this is in the area between 38th and 56, which we are proposing to add 2 bus median lanes down the center of the street. So what you can see here is we still retain the 2 northbound and 2 southbound general purpose lanes. So we are not reducing general purpose lanes here. And then from widening, we actually add 2 bus only lanes down the center of the street. Buses will have their own lane and then pull up to the stations, which you can see in blue here. Next slide. This is another example here. There's not a huge amount to show here, but this is 84th in that area that I previously mentioned was going to curbside. So we had originally proposed median stations here, which would have required quite a bit of widening. We went back to curbside here But the stations will still be the full-blown 60-foot long platforms, large station canopies, and then I'll have all the amenities that I mentioned before. Next slide. And here's one last graphic that we wanted to share. This is that 96 roundabout that we have added since we last shared the plans. This is also unique because between 121st and 96, we have proposed median bus lanes. So the median bus lane is actually ending right here. So buses will generally go through the roundabout and then pull into the bus only lane here. And so we've got a lot of things combining here. There's still continuing conversations going on with WashDOT and the city of Tacoma right now to make sure that this is not only going to allow for a fast and efficient flow through the corridor, but also make sure that it's safe. Next slide. So moving on to project timeline. As some of you may know, we started this project back in 2017. Back then, it was a high capacity transit study for the State Route 7 Pacific Avenue. We assessed this corridor because it was our highest ridership. Route 1 is our highest ridership of all our routes. We, back in late 2017, early 2018, selected the mode. So we decided to go bus rapid transit for this corridor. And then we, in 2018, early 2019, selected the locally preferred alternative. There was two options that we looked for BRT. One used all BAT lanes and business access transit lanes. So we would have added a bus only lane on the outside or curbside. And then we had the other option, which is the one we went with, which adds actual median bus only lanes. We also in 2018 began the FTA small starts application and started the environmental review. In 2019, we actually kicked off the full design of the project and have continued that into 2020 and then 2021. Things that we accomplished this year was we finalized NEPA earlier this year. We're still working on SEPA right now. Things that will be coming up is we hope to formalize the 60% design here and issue that in the coming future. We will begin in early 2022 some property acquisition, and that will continue into 2023, 2024. The construction start right now is planned for really late 2022, early 2023. And the project itself should take about 2.5 years of construction. So starting in January 2023, if that's when we kick off construction, we should be done in mid-2025 with this project. So right now we are planning for revenue service starting in mid-2025. Next slide.
Sean, could you expand on the NEPA and SEPA abbreviations?
Yeah, thanks for calling that out. So there's the National Environmental Protection Act, and then there's the state version essentially of that. So because we are federally funded on this, we have to go through both of these processes. So we have worked with the FTA since we were rated in late 2018, 2019, just finished NEPA here earlier this year. We are still working on SEPA, but plan to wrap that up in early to mid 2022. this right here explains the project phases. And the reason I wanted to include this is I get a lot of questions of exactly where we'll be in construction. And that's hard to pinpoint exactly when we'll be where, especially for a project that takes 2.5 years in construction. But right now, the plan is to start from south to north. I will say that the downtown Tacoma area has a holiday moratorium. And if you look at our schedule right now, I think we would be getting to the downtown area in that period, late 2024, early 2025. So there is a possibility that we may swap phases E and F. So that's if we end up hitting that holiday moratorium in downtown Tacoma. But the rest of the phases should follow right after each other. So we would start with phase A down in the Spanaway area. And then for a rough order magnitude, we would be working about 2 to 3 months for each phase. And we would be moving, like I said, from south to north. So construction, like I said, starting in very early 2023, and then over 2.5 years moving from south to north through this corridor. And then project funding. I thought it was important just to let everyone know where we're getting our funding. So currently we have secured 60 million from the Sound Transit ST3 package. So Sound Transit has already signed an agreement with us for that funding. We have several state and WashDOT funding that adds up to a roughly 19 million. And then we have some federal FIT funding that adds up to 13 million. Some of these grants above here require local matching funds. So we are putting roughly 3 million of Pierce Transit local funds into this project. And then last but not least, the FTA Small Starts grant is little over 75 million. That is still stated as pending, but the good news is we were included in the presidential budget earlier this year. So the money is already earmarked for us. We're just working on getting through 60% design and readiness review right now with the FTA so that we can sign that final agreement to secure that 75 million. The total budget is roughly 170 million. We're going through a pretty detailed cost estimate right now. And due to just the volatility of the market right now, some of this is looking like it could trend a little higher than 170 million, but we're doing everything we can to try to bring the budget back to that.
Sean, we had a question. Is there any consideration to implement Spanaway to Tacoma Dome before the last Market Street section is complete?
Sorry, could you repeat that question?
Yeah. Any consideration to implement Spanaway to Tacoma Dome before the last Market Street section is complete?
Per the phasing plan that I showed, that is the current plan, is to move south to north with this project. We unfortunately can't phase the project or take out sections because of how we, it basically has to do with the Small Starts grant. The project as a whole was presented to the FTA, so they are expecting full improvements all the way from Spanaway into downtown Tacoma. But the downtown portion is probably going to be the last leg of the improvements with the Spanaway to Tacoma Dome Station being completed before that. If the question though is referring to if we'll open it up before, I would say no. At this point, we would want to finish the entire project to get sign off on it. Part of it has to do with permitting as well, as we have to complete the full project before we can open it. So hopefully I answered your question. So I'm gonna turn it over here now. I believe Joe Rimpey from Tacoma Power is on, so I'm gonna turn it over to him.
Okay. Yes, I'm Joe Rimpey with Tacoma Power. I'm one of the senior engineers here in what we call line engineering, and I've been working with the Pierce Transit team and the city team for a number of years now. So we all know each other rather well. And just want to make sure that those of you who are our customers and also the residents of the city know that we are working extremely closely with Pierce Transit on this project. And we're, as you note on the slide, the improvements in areas along the way as the lanes either get widened or other improvements are required by the city, the county, and the state may impact our facilities. We have estimated around 100 to 150 poles that may have to be relocated in some form or fashion. And I know that Pierce Transit is working hard to limit that, and we appreciate that. And then also as part of our efforts here, we may be acquiring some property rights from people, and that won't be known until we have had a really good look at what will be the upcoming design, 60% design drawings. So, but again, I just want to make sure that all of you know that Tacoma Power and Tacoma Water and all the other entities within the city are working very, very closely with the Pierce Transit project. We will be likely the first construction related activity that you will see on this project. We have to move our facilities out of the way, as you might imagine, in order for the contractor for Pierce Transit to initiate their work. So the schedule is still being finely tuned, but within a year or two, you will see the big orange trucks out there moving our facilities in preparation for the Pierce Transit work. The next slide. So good examples here is some of the impacts maybe that you see in the existing pole as it is today, but as a result of the project, it may be relocated to where that traffic cone is. So that's some of what we're dealing with. Next slide. And then another example of that. And part of what will happen is we'll end up getting closer to some of the structures along the corridor. As a result, we'll be going taller so as not to interfere with your ability to maintain your businesses or your buildings. So that's really all I've got to say.
So my name is Jesse Angel. I'm with Tacoma Water, and much like Joe Rimpey and everybody, I've been working with Pierce Transit and City of Tacoma and everybody on this project. And much like Tacoma Power, these improvements will have impacts on Tacoma Water and our facilities. These impacts will be on some sections of water main. And so we will have to be replacing those sections of water main. The exact impacts are not known at this time. As I said, we're working on the plans, and we get those impacts. We'll let that kind of figure that out. There will be impacts on water services. There will be relocation of services as the sidewalks are moved or stuff like that. And so there will be impacts to your water, but we will work with each customer to minimize those impacts and kind of work around schedules as much as we can. So much like power, we will be out there before Pierce Transit does any work, and we look forward to working with everybody and making this a successful project. That's all I have.
Hello, my name is Manuel Abarca with Washington State Department of Transportation, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about WashDOT policy and process, and hopefully this doesn't get too boring. But what I want to tell you right now is that part of the project is to perform a traffic analysis, and that is currently in progress, and we are currently reviewing the reports. Also, part of this is that we are performing what is called an intersection control evaluation. And what that is a federal process where we look at all of the factors and try to determine what the most appropriate intersection control is at each of the locations. And in this particular case, so far, we've identified 4 locations on the project that are going to be roundabouts, and the remaining are signals. But I just want to emphasize that that is currently under evaluation, and when the plan is final, then everybody will know. Next slide, please. And so I want to talk a little bit about roundabouts, and WashDOT's experience has shown that roundabouts definitely can improve travel times, especially during the off-peak periods. They really help reduce the problems we have on our state facility with left turn crashes, which everybody knows those high angle crashes can be very severe and lead to injuries and fatalities. The great thing about the roundabouts is that it moves traffic at a lower speed than other intersection treatments. And currently there are examples of where we have BRT routes and roundabouts commingling perfectly fine. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Amber Stanley. I'm a planner at Pierce Transit for the BRT project. I'm going to share an update about our outreach, property acquisition, and our stream system expansion study. Our last public meeting was held in December of 2020, where we had over 100 members of the public join, making it one of our most attended open houses. Much like today's presentation, that open house provided a project overview, the current design at that time, and a project timeline. If you're interested in viewing that open house presentation, you can find it on our website located at ridestream.org. We've also got our virtual BRT tour, which is translated into Spanish as well as Vietnamese. Currently, there have been about 1,500 sessions, and it takes about 3 minutes per session. And then a couple of future updates that have been touched on briefly in this presentation already, but we plan to have our 60% design public meeting in early 2020. As Tina noted earlier, that's something that we're still working towards. And we'll also have our State Environmental Policy Act, also known as SEPA. Sean mentioned that earlier as well. And that'll be issued in early 2022. Next slide, please. So part of our work for this project includes coordinating with property owners along the corridor. And this work continues today. There have been a series of meetings held. These meetings are to review design and construction impacts and the property acquisition process. Additionally, there's also been informational packets that have been mailed out to those who may be impacted. And that just provides a project overview. It also talks about a notice of potential purchase or temporary construction access, depending on where that property is and what the needs are in that area. And then also details about just the process in general for those who may be impacted along the corridor. Now I'm going to give an update about our stream system expansion study. You can go to the next slide, please, Nathan. So the stream system expansion study, you may also see this acronym as SESS, but this study aims to analyze what the next BRT line in our system should be. The study actually began this year in July, and it's about 15 months long. We have a consulting team that we work with. They're called KPFF and Nelson Nygaard, and they help facilitate this study process. So as you can see on the map, we're analyzing routes 2, 3, 4, and 402. You can see these identified here as their colors, blue, orange, purple, and green. And the purpose of this study, as I mentioned, is to really identify what route should be next. These routes are identified in our long range plan. You can find that on page 91. And again, that's located on our website as well. And we've reviewed, part of the reason we've chose these routes is just looking at route productivity. So BRT1, our current project, has our highest ridership, as Tina mentioned earlier. Route 2 has the second highest, and then Route 3 has the third, and so on. So that's part of the reason these were selected. These routes are also identified in Puget Sound Regional Council's Regional Transportation Plan, which is being updated next year to extend to a 2050 vision. We need to have these in there in order to qualify for funding at the federal level. So that's the very first step in the process, and we make sure that we got that done. Additionally, as we look at these routes, we look at regional growth centers or places that are trip generators, such as sounder stations, colleges, universities, et cetera. That helps us as we plan for construction and design funding. We also look at land use that supports high capacity transit, both existing and planned build out, such as multifamily homes and other things that generate trips. You can go to the next slide, please. So part of our expansion study includes working with a number of different members from agencies that are associated with those routes that you saw on the previous slide. We started this expansion study with about 40 members on our technical advisory committee, also referred to as the TAC, and that was the same process that we did for BRT1. What's really great is that our members are from a variety of different agencies and backgrounds. They're not all technical engineers or planners, and so they help us better understand what those community needs are, and they give us input that we may not consider otherwise. And that's something that we take into consideration as this study is done and as we move on to the next phases. If you can go to the next slide, please, Nathan. Thank you. So what you see here on this slide is it just provides an overview of the study process. And if you want to take a closer look at this, I know it's rather small. You can find this on our website as well. We've got a number of fact sheets about the expansion study. But again, it's a 15-month study, started in July. The contract is slated to end September 2022. And in the end, we hope to have an outcome that tells us what route we should develop next and why. And that'll include justification criteria, cost, termini, et cetera. And if you can go to the next slide, please, Nathan. And this graphic here is also something you can find on our website. And so it's dependent on the outcome of this study, but it gives you a really good idea of sort of the timeline. So kind of shows you these different routes, how they might take place once we get the information from our study, but it shows that the study takes place in 2021, 2022 to 2023. We go through that environmental impacts and you can kind of see how it walks through. Of course, it's subject to change, so the routes in this order may be different depending on the outcome of that study. But again, you can take a look at this on our website, and as we get more information, our website will be updated as well. And if you can go to the next slide, please, Nathan. And to close, I just want to illustrate that BRT in general, it helps with our traffic congestion as we adapt to the growing demand being placed on our roads in this area. It also helps enrich our community by supporting the needs in the area. And then that's really all that we have for today. So I'll turn it back over to Nathan for some questions and answers. Thank you.
So thank you to all of our presenters this evening. And so now we are at our question and answer portion of this evening's event. I will hit some of the live questions, and then we have several questions that were submitted by the public ahead of this meeting. And so anyone on the team, feel free to jump in to answer these questions if you know the answer. We've had it come through the chat and through the question box as well, pertaining to the drivers, the driving situation at Pierce Transit. So to summarize the multiple inquiries that came in, essentially, how are we going to get the drivers to operate the BRT service when we currently are experiencing a driver shortage?
I can jump in on that one. Part of the driver shortage, this is really a national trend that is happening right now. You see this not only in transit, we know it's happening at other transit agencies around the country, but even when I go to my local restaurant down the street, there are signs up, please be patient, because restaurants don't have enough servers. So this is a trend that is nationwide. It's not just in transit, but it certainly is impacting Pierce Transit. And we have a number of different strategies right now, including marketing and trying to hire additional drivers to help with the current issue that we have. The BRT service is projected to begin operating in 2025, as Sean mentioned when we talked about the timeline. And we certainly hope that this driver shortage is a short-term issue, that as we rebound from COVID and we see improvements in our economy, we'll be able to staff up fully and we won't have those issues with our service. So we are projecting that by 2025, we would be hiring additional drivers and we would be filling those vacancies that we have. So I hope that helps answer that question.
Thank you, Tina. Teresa Evans, I see that you have your hand raised. You're not able to ask your question verbally, so if you could please type it in the chat box or in the question and answer section, we will be sure to get to your question. The next question we have, will we be posting the slides from this evening's webinar to the BRT site? And if so, how soon? Are we also going to be providing the contact information for the speakers? And if so, where will we find them? I will say that this meeting is recorded and it will be posted to our BRT website, just like our last one from December of 2020 was. Tina, but if you could further expand upon that question.
Yes, we will be posting, and what we can do, just so it's easy for someone to find our contact information, we can share our Pierce Transit BRT team's contact information on that presentation. We'll just add it to that slide so that if someone wants to reach out to any of us, you have that. You can also contact us through the project website. We have a BRT at Pierce Transit email that will reach us as well. So we have a number of different ways, and I think that is also on this presentation.
The next question that we have is it possible to add more roundabouts to the route?
I would say that we are planning for the 4 that are there. We've done a very thorough and comprehensive look at intersections with the DOT and the city of Tacoma when we did this evaluation, looking at projections on congestion delays, but also on right-of-way. And one of our concerns that we have been working toward is to minimize impacts to the community as much as possible. And so one of our focal points as we worked on our interchange control evaluation that Manuel mentioned was that a tenet behind that was that we would only have small property discussions. We would not impact a property to the point that we would need to purchase or talk to someone about a purchase of an entire property with a roundabout. And part of our strategy has continued to be that for Pierce Transit. So we have some parameters. The 4 that we've identified have fit within those parameters. Also, as we add more of those types of amenities, it reduces the transit benefit for other amenities that are planned for the corridor, because we do have a limited budget. So if we were to make that type of transition, that would mean bus improvements. And this is a transit project that we wouldn't be able to implement because of that cost change.
So we've had a few follow-up questions or comments pertaining to the driver shortage. And I will say that our team has, our recruiting team has really put forth an effort, and we've marketed the opportunities that are available at Pierce Transit throughout community outreach events throughout this spring, summer, and as we're entering the fall season. We've taken steps as an agency to make the position more attractive to outside applicants. But once we bring those applicants on, there is a training process. And so as soon as they're hired, they can't immediately jump in a bus and start on a route. We have to take them through our training process, and that does take time. We did recently graduate a new class of drivers, and we have another class starting with those drivers. So we are trying to be as proactive as possible to bring additional riders on. And so as we transition to the next question, it says, can someone share how left turning traffic will be accommodated and limited within sections that will have exclusive median BRT lanes.
I think on that one, oh, do you want to jump in, Sean?
Yeah, I can answer that one. So there are several miles that we are proposing median bus lanes. In those areas, there was typically, it's not all locations, but typically there was a center turn lane. That will be removed and be replaced by median bus lanes. We have, though, been working on some safety features to put in mountable curb that would allow emergency vehicles to be able to do a mid-block left turn. We don't want to preclude any emergency vehicles from being able to do that. But for general purpose traffic, if a business or a home was mid-block in the area specifically between 56th and 38th or 112th and 96th, you wouldn't be able to do a unprotected left turn mid-block. You would have to turn right and then go down to either the next roundabout, which would allow you to do a 180-degree turn. We are also proposing key locations for U-turns, so people can also do a U-turn. Really, the median bus lanes are similar to access management that you'll see on other state routes where there's a curb or a median in the center, which does stop people from doing that unprotected left turn. But we'll be addressing it similar to how I think WashDOT has handled it on other state routes, where we will allow U-turns and other ways of being able to reverse course on the state route.
Next question is, can we let the public know when businesses between 46th and 56th Street who have such a limited parking area, when will they be notified about the acquisition of property?
I touched a little bit on this earlier. Our schedule right now is a little in flux, but we are thinking that property acquisition is going to start taking place early next year. We have to fully surpass the 60% design in order to get there, so that we are confident of the design before we start acquiring property. So it's most likely that folks in that area would be contacted next year or early 2023 with an acquisition if it's required. I will note that a lot of our property impacts are actually temporary. So during construction, when you're building a wall or even sidewalk right against the property line, it requires you to a lot of times grade or form right past the property line. In those cases, which is over half of the property impacts, we would temporarily use a portion of someone's property, but we would get an agreement for that and also reimburse them for that. After we are done using the area for forming up the wall or the sidewalk, we would then put back what we discern. So if it was plants, grass, a favorite fence, those things would be put back afterwards.
So a follow-up to that question, Sean, when construction is underway, will businesses be compensated for the loss in revenue? Whom can they go to talk about this and other concerns that small mom and pop businesses have?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think if we're impacting your business, we will most likely reach out to you or have already. We've, I think, talked to close to a couple hundred business and homeowners down the corridor already about this project. So I would just suggest if we do reach out to us, at least, pick up the phone and work with us so that we know how you access your business, what parking you rely on. If we know those things, we can typically work around them to try to disturb them less. But with that said, obviously construction does sometimes make it a little harder to access businesses. Luckily on this project, we were able to implement GCCM, which allowed us to bring on a contractor before construction starts. So we have already selected Granite Construction for this project, and we'll hopefully be negotiating a formal contract for the project with them next year. But the reason I bring that up is they're already on board. They're already looking at traffic control right now. They're already trying to think about how do we ultimately keep businesses open and disturb you less. So a big thing that we've talked about is getting in once and getting out once. So, there's multiple stages a lot of times in these construction projects that include utility installation, concrete, asphalt work. We are trying to phase this so that we do all of those things in one phase so that we don't come in, disturb the street, and then come back a couple months later and disturb it again. But we'll be in contact with everyone as we are going down the project corridor, trying to work with you to make sure that you can maintain your access to either your home or business.
I would add too on that one, keep in mind the type of construction we are, where we are not putting a track down the middle of the roadway. We are building our BRT, which is a lot of stations, and then spot construction or improvements or those roundabouts. And one of the things we talk about as a design team is communicating very quickly, having the conversation with DOT. Can we build a roundabout over a 3-day weekend or something and get it done quickly to minimize impact? So we will have those types of conversations as we get closer and closer, but then also making sure that we're helping put out signage that says businesses are open, or localized campaigns to help try to direct people to businesses, kind of like shopping local campaigns. As a public agency, those are the types of things that we can do.
So the next, thanks Tina and Sean for that. The next question, how many bikes will be able to fit on one of the BRT coaches?
We are still speccing a lot of our details. It's 3 to 4 bikes generally that fit in those. And if you've ridden Community Transit Swift, that is one of the bike racks that is very popular that we're considering. So those are the type of bike racks, because you will take them in and you just dock it right in the bus. So it's very different, where today riders go to the front and have 2 or 3 bikes on the outside. Now it's on the inside of the vehicle instead.
What is a safe transition from median to right lane at South 56th Street?
Safe transition. Talking about the tapers or intersection queuing, I'm wondering.
I do not have any further details to the question outside of just that. What is the safe transition from median to right lane at South 56th Street?
I'll try to answer that. 56 is the exact location where if you're heading south, our median bus lanes will be stopping. And so operators that operating the BRT line would transition around that location. I think it's important to note that our station spacing is about a half a mile here. So if you currently go out there today, we have bus stops every about quarter mile. So operators would have nearly or almost all that half a mile to really transition from the median lanes over to the far or curbside before the next station. So I don't know if there's a exact rule on how long we should allow an operator to be able to transition from the middle of the street to the curbside. But in our case, we have close to about a half a mile between stations. So operators will have that space to do that transition.
Just to make it, we have about 25 minutes reserved left for the meeting, and we have about 14 questions, including those that were pre-submitted. So the next question is, if the BRT stops in downtown Tacoma, what route will riders then take the rest of the way for what the existing Route 1 goes? Will Route 1 riders now have to transfer to get to their destination?
Yes, so riders will have to transfer. So there will be, it could still be called the Route 1, the 6th Avenue leg from TCC into downtown Tacoma. We will determine that as we get closer, but as they come into Tacoma, Commerce Street likely, they could transfer onto the bus rapid transit corridor. They could transfer onto many of the other local routes, depending on where their trip ends, or even link light rail at that location to continue their trips. So they would have a number of different options, and the BRT would be one of those really frequent options at 10-minute frequency or frequent trips in the peak time that they could transfer to.
So do we have an ETA for the 60% design threshold?
We have an estimate early 2022, and so we're coordinating on some very different details right now. So that date, it's in a bit of flux right now, but we are working toward our goal of that first quarter of 2022.
Is there sufficient demand for BRT services to Tacoma Dome Station to warrant the time penalty and detour to serve it?
There really is. In fact, when you look at our ridership projections, it is one of the highest boarding areas and transfer areas to other regional services. So it will be a key stop along the corridor. And if you think about all those services that are at Tacoma Dome Station, the addition of Tacoma Dome Link extension that it will be coming into that area, as well as Sounder services, Express, even connections to Amtrak and Greyhound. It is one of those stops that has a very high projection.
A second part to that first question, if BRT expansion is based upon ridership, why is the remainder of the Route 1 corridor not being improved next, being as it is the other half of the busiest Pierce Transit route?
No, that's a very good question. And we look at that, and we've had discussions bumping up the frequency on the Route 1. Do you add it in the future? Part of the dilemma was the length of our BRT corridor. Also, that 6th Avenue area is so congested as far as availability of right-of-way in that area, but it is a very popular segment of the Route 1. So we keep looking at what else can we do to help improve that corridor so it becomes part of this network. And while you didn't see it on that map, that doesn't mean that it wouldn't either be a different type of a high capacity service or maybe be picked up by a different corridor in the future.
Someone mentioned they didn't see Parkland Light and Water listed as companies that we've been working with. Has that utility company been involved in the planning?
I can take this one. So the list that we shared earlier, if it's the one that was part of the expansion study, that was about the potential routes that we will, not those that are involved in BRT1. Part of my role on the BRT1 project is to work with utility companies who are impacted. And I can say that I am actively working with Parkland Light and Water. We're having great conversations about relocating their utilities, and things are moving along nicely. So that's a great question. Thank you.
Our next question, someone mentions that they have been using our services for a long time and they get text alerts and things with their trips. They said they understand that the BRT will help the Route 1, but will the Route 1 be running beside the BRT, or is the Route 1 going to be gone?
That's a really good question as well. The Route 1 will change where it will, and as part of the answer to the previous question, the Route 1 would end at Commerce Street. So we are not doing an overlay of bus rapid transit and local service. The corridor that is planned for bus rapid transit, that is the only service that will be on that corridor, which is why we are also planning for that stations to be slightly closer at that half mile. You see other systems that do this overlay, and the stations may be a mile to a mile and a half apart because of that, and they'll have local stops there as well. In our analysis, we determined that the running that Route 1 BRT exclusively and having the stations closer together was the greatest benefit for our system.
Someone says they take the bus on 34th and Pacific. Are we saying that the 34th Street bus stop will be gone?
I'd have to look at my map real fast, but yes, 38th Street would be a station. And let me see if I can tell quickly. I think the next one, let me pull it up while we're talking. I'll get you that.
Would you like for me to move to the next question?
Yeah, I'm going to look up the next station.
Okay, so the next question we have is what will happen to the side streets like C Street and A Street in Parkland? Increase traffic?
I'll try to answer that. A big reason, why we haven't gone into full 60% design is because we've been working with WashDOT and the city of Tacoma to finalize our traffic analysis. So we're doing everything we can to try to install this BRT without hampering general purpose traffic. So specifically in the area that you noted, in that area, for the most part, we aren't even installing median lanes. So there shouldn't be a huge change or want for folks to divert to parallel corridors. But that is a big part of what we're looking at right now, is just to make sure that we can implement this without causing major diversion off the corridor.
Okay, our attendee who asked about 56th Street said thank you for answering their question, and that helped. They look forward to seeing future designs at future meetings. The next question, the swales in Parkland have aquifer recharges and landscaping value. What will happen to them?
Yeah, we are doing a full stormwater and water quality design on this project. So in the cases where we do affect any of those swales, we will be replacing them. For maintenance reasons, things such as vaults or things similar to that are not something that I think WashDOT likes. So for the most part, we are replacing, swales or natural drainage infrastructure that allows infiltration in kind. It just may be moved a little to the side to allow for widening.
I have my answer on 34th Street.
Go ahead, Tina.
There is a station at 34th Street. So I just wanted to confirm that. So no, your stop at 34th Street is a station at 34th Street now.
Thank you. We have one more question and then we can switch over to the questions that were submitted prior to this meeting. Last question here. How early and late is the BRT expected to run? Some of us work late into the evening, currently well after the Route 1 stops running.
Do you want me to?
Oh, sure. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, there will be expanded hours on this. Not only are we decreasing the headway between buses to 10 to 15 minutes, depending on the day, time of the day, but we are, I believe last time I checked, looking at about 20 hours or so of service.
Yeah.
This route should operate later in the evening and start earlier. We are obviously determining right now, based off the corridor improvements, how many buses we need and how we can keep the 10 or 15 minute headways between those buses. So things are a little bit in flux, but I'm happy to say that the BRT should provide longer service hours than what you're used to right now. Tina, being the planning manager, I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
No, you did a great job. Thank you for stepping in for me real fast.
So we will transition to our pre-submitted questions and I'll go ahead and read those out like I have been. And if anyone wants to jump in and answer, there are elements in the design of Stream BRT that detract from. Where are the elements in design of Stream BRT that detract from the aspirations of Vision Zero?
I was going to jump in and help with that one. I was just recently looking at, there's the Vision Zero Network and the American Public Transit Association, and was reminded that transit services are one of those services that help support Vision Zero, that communities that have strong public transportation tend to have decreases in accidents. And so, that's part of the answer, but our BRT project really does see itself as having an important role in safety for all road users. And we mentioned some of the elements in the project, including those 9 signalized crosswalks. We're estimating 11 new or upgraded pedestrian crossings, and then a dozen intersections with controlled left turns, which help improve safety and reduce crashes on busy arterials. So there's some of those features that will help the corridor. There's other countermeasures that we're adding to help with safety. There are trade-offs though, and one of those trade-offs could be at larger intersections where we are adding a transit lane or a turn lane to mitigate some of the impact of our project. That does increase the crosswalk distance. So there's the trade-off where we then have median stations. Those are of refuge and help with someone who can't make it across the intersection and provide a safe place to wait. So there's just a lot of ways of really looking at this question, but access management, some of those restrictions on left turns at some of the most busy places where we know there are also accidents along the corridor, help with Vision Zero aspirations. And then median stations, 6 of those are proposed along the corridor. Those are also going to help with some of the safety elements. So it's that trade-off. There are features that you might be targeting as a distraction, but there are so many safety improvements that are included with the project.
What is Pierce County doing to mitigate hazards to people not on motor vehicles on Pacific Avenue?
I can talk to Pierce Transit And so Pierce Transit, and this is a Pierce Transit project, and the county, of course, is our partner, as is the city of Tacoma and Pierce County, or DOT. But as part of our project, we're helping improve sidewalks through a pretty significant portion of the corridor. We're widening them to current standards, and there will be about 4.5 miles of new or improved sidewalks on the corridor. We're also completing sidewalks on some areas like between 99th and 112th on the corridor where there's current gaps. Those would be generally just on one side of the road, but it really does help mitigate some of those hazards and help people who are walking or on bicycles. Speaking of bicycles, we are including enhancements, some short shared use paths along some of the busiest intersections on the corridor in the city. And in the city section, we're also keeping in mind and accounting for where there are future bike lanes already identified in the city's implementation plans. At 38th Street, it's a designated mixed-use center, and will bring the few blocks that are impacted by the project up to the city's standards for sidewalk widths and then pedestrian scale lighting. So those are a number of ways that we'll be helping.
Since the Stream BRT program is more than one project, what are some of the most important lessons learned that we will implement with BRT 2?
You know, there's a lot, and I think of it from the project management perspective. Lessons learned are always good to do at phases of your project, at the end of a project, and help improve the next project. And we can leverage those lessons that we're learning. Some of the ones that I think about are coordinating closely and early in the planning process with the utilities. And we invited the utilities, and we've been working with them throughout this process and this phase, and they've graciously joined us in the last 2 open houses. So working very closely with them very early on, so that they're aware of what the project, how it's shaping up. Also, thinking through the impacts of traffic on the corridor, and there are things like where we might propose queue jumps at signalized intersections or crossing distance between at signals that require retiming at some busy intersections. So earlier traffic studies and work to help during the planning phase as well. That can help us as we move forward. Also, we, during our planning phase, work very, very closely with our planning departments at our jurisdictions along the corridor, keeping them involved more throughout the process, so that we're talking with all the various important departments at our partner agencies, so that they're part of the project and trying to reduce both schedule costs and schedule risks. Not only from early planning, but through design, development, and into construction.
Okay, that seems to be a good segue to the next question. Have partnering staff been an obstacle to getting this project to completion?
Yeah, I'll try to answer that. Well, I'd like to just start by noting that we have several City of Tacoma folks and WashDOT on the phone here presenting today. So I hope that shows that I think we are supported by our partners, and we have a very cordial relationship with them. You know, unfortunately, I think this project, and I'll try to touch on this when we get to number 5, has had a lot of challenges just because it is a very unique project. We not only have some of the first in the state on this project, but we are also permitting through multiple jurisdictions, the Pierce County being one, WashDOT being another, and then City of Tacoma. Not only that, but the areas between 96 and 38 are dual jurisdiction. So we are permitting not only through City of Tacoma, but WashDOT. And even though each of those agencies has great standards, not all of them align. So a lot of the challenges have just been working with our partners to align the standards, especially in that area where WashDOT and City of Tacoma oversee the state route.
Moving into question 5, what policy or procedural changes would you suggest to policymakers to get their staff on the same page to support rapid transit projects?
There's a lot to unpack here. I think the thing that comes to mind when I get asked this question is I always think back to the, it's a green hierarchy triangle, which is in the City of Tacoma's TMP or Transit Master Plan, which I think came out in 2015 or so. What that green hierarchy is it's an inverted triangle. And on top of that triangle, you have pedestrians. And then below that, you have bikes. And then below that, you have transit. And then below that, you have typically freight and general purpose traffic. The reason why it's an inverted triangle is because we typically have to prioritize the top, which would be people that are walking over GP traffic. What that triangle I think is saying is there has to be trade-offs. Obviously, the more lanes that you add on a road, it's great for general purpose traffic, but the wider you make intersections, the wider you make roads, the more unsafe it makes for pedestrians to cross. So I think the important thing is to know on projects like this, there has to be trade-offs. We can't prioritize every mode the same just because things that are great for general purpose traffic aren't always great for pedestrians or bikes. So I think if you're going and talking to policymakers, it's just making them understand that if we want to prioritize BRTs and high capacity transit projects, that we have to allow for trade-offs. There's going to be, unfortunately, some slowdown for general purpose traffic to prioritize high capacity transit. There also will be some slowdowns to general purpose traffic in vehicles to make it safer for pedestrians and bikes. That's just the unfortunate nature of it. I wish we could prioritize all of them the same, but if you ever look at that green hierarchy, there's a reason why it's not a square. It's because there's no way that you can safely implement road improvements that are safe and efficient for all those modes. So that's really what I think policymakers could work on is making policies, procedures, and codes that allow for trade-offs and allow for trade-offs that make it easier for projects like BRT being implemented.
So we've got just a few minutes left. And
can I jump in and just add just something from a WashDOT perspective, just to be clear? And I hope this is taken with all grace, is that we are the Washington State Department of Transportation. We are not the Department of Motor Vehicles. So I just want to make that perfectly clear. And if anybody has any questions about WashDOT's commitment, I highly suggest that they go onto our webpage and look at our strategic plan. It's right there in our vision that Washington travelers have a safe, sustainable, and integrated multimodal transportation system. And what I can tell you is that WashDOT is committed to multimodal projects. And I know from working with the staff on our partner agencies that they share the same vision. Thank you.
Thank you for that. We have just a few minutes left and 2 questions. How will this project affect the local environment, especially the widening of roads, which increases habitat loss already threatened in a delicate urban ecosystem?
Yeah, I can take this one, Nathan. So the project has attempted to limit widening to the most important areas and has no major impacts to the local environment. And this is confirmed through the NEPA that we've discussed earlier. So that's the National Environment Protection Act. And it has a lot of requirements that we have to adhere to. And so for this project, the major widening areas, they're already developed areas and often within paved areas. So the project also intends to plant over 200 new trees to improve the Pacific Avenue corridor ecosystem in the long term, along with new or upgraded stormwater biofiltration trenches as well. There will be about 30 of those that are implemented.
Thank you, Amber. And finally, the last question that we have, there is a right turn pocket in the northbound direction at South 38th and Pacific in the 60% design. How will Pierce Transit mitigate the likelihood that pedestrians will be struck by vehicles making right on red turns in this lane configuration? Will right on red be disallowed? And will pedestrians have their own green signal to approach the stations?
That's a good question. I'll take this one as well. While adding a right turn lane does not necessarily increase the likelihood of pedestrians being struck, it does increase pedestrian exposure in the street by a traffic lane by about 3 seconds of additional time. This project is proposing the installation of leading pedestrian interval signals that provides pedestrians with the opportunity to cross with some leeway before the vehicle signal is activated for traffic. So this signal operation gives pedestrians a head start to cross the street while the street signals are still red. This 5-second head start is expected per highway safety practice to reduce the incidence of pedestrians being struck by vehicles.
Thank you, Amber, and the rest of our panelists. We have no further questions. And so ways that the community can get involved, we update as updates happen to our website, ridestream.org. To reach any member of the staff working on this BRT project, you can reach them at brt@piercetransit.org or call the BRT line at 253-983-3407. We also have the ability for you to receive emailed communications through us through Gov Delivery, and that can be found on our Stay Connected page on our website. So again, I'd like to thank all the panelists and all of the community who turned out for this event. This video will be uploaded to our BRT website. And like Tina mentioned, we will also get the presentation uploaded there as well. Thank you all. Have a good evening.